Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, July 8th, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2022 House elections and the pluralvote.com political forecast, where they are giving us an indication of which political party has the best chance at victory in the upcoming midterm elections. Now, Pluralvote did predict the 2020 presidential election and the 2020 House elections, which we will take a look at in just a few minutes, but for this estimation and for this model itself, this is one of the first ones we've seen released during the 2022 election season, largely because we don't have all of the congressional districts. But based off what information we do have now, and based off of potentially previously drawn districts, Pluralvote has released our first ever House midterm model, where we can move it in an interactive way, where we can look around the country and look at some of these areas where they believe Republicans will have victories over Democrats. And it is quite interesting. I mean, looking at the United States House of Representatives, the Democratic Party is probably much more worried about this than they are the United States Senate. Why? The United States Senate is in a position where the Democratic Party possibly and potentially, in a very likely scenario, could gain seats or at least pick up one from the GOP. But the House is an entirely different story. We have a little bit of time to actually take a look, a little bit more to actually jump into in this state, but a lot of information from this model and a lot of individual races predicted some pickups for Democrats, but mainly pickups for Republicans. So our model on face value shows that the Republican Party in this prediction will have 220 House seats. The Democrats will have 215. Essentially, the majority will be 5 seats over the Democrats, but a majority of just 3 seats. For the Republicans, 218, 219, and 220 puts them 3 ahead. 3 votes in the against the GOP ultimately would put the Democratic Party in a position where they could block major pieces of legislation. And this majority starts out as one that I wouldn't exactly say is too good for the GOP. Given the 2020 House election results, they should be doing much better than at 220 to 215. Now, there is still plenty of time until the midterm elections, but I'm not going to deny that I was surprised to see the Republican Party in such a position. I don't believe the Democratic Party will retain control of the House of Representatives as it stands currently. I've been pretty vocal about that. In fact, I've made individual videos about that, pushing that issue to, make it known across my viewership, because it is a firm belief that I have right now. The United States Senate is a position where the Democratic Party could gain seats, but the House, I'm really not expecting much. But I was also surprised that these House results were not nearly as favorable for the GOP. And while I partially understand that it is very early on, I was still a bit surprised. I mean, looking at the toss-ups column for the GOP in the House elections, I mean, they won every single race. Not a single toss-up race was won by the Democratic Party. And if we want to take a look at some of these closer races, for example, Iowa's 2nd Congressional District, we can take a look here in the 2nd District. The Republicans are expected to win by just 1 point, but that's much higher, I would say, than 0.01. I mean, the closest election decided by a margin of 12 votes out of nearly 400,000. Yes, that is a very, I would say, much better margin for the Republicans than what they actually had. In addition, it's not just there. Let's take a look at a closer House race. For example, maybe New York's 22nd Congressional District. In this district, in the 22nd, over here in the state of New York, the Republican is expected to win by 12 points. And the reason for that potentially could be due to the fact that there is redistricting underway in New York. It's losing a congressional district. Potentially this New York's 22nd can be redrawn into a Republican area, but an 80% chance of victory in a race that was decided decisively by an extremely narrow margin of 0.03%. Now the Republican is expected to win there by 11.5%. So for many of these races, the GOP is in a very strong position of picking up seats. And while Democrats do, on occasion, in some of these maps, have pickup opportunities, in many other cases, they end up losing. Looking at our popular vote forecast, they expect the Democratic Party to win by 1.2%. I agree that the Democratic Party will win the popular vote. For a brief period of time, they had the Republicans ahead in the popular vote, saying that the Republicans would win by 4 percentage points. I never really agreed with that. I can possibly see a 1 or 2 point victory for the GOP in 2022, but I'm not really completely understanding an estimation of plus 4%. But right now, I would say I think the Democrats will start out with that popular vote advantage and will likely win with a popular vote advantage. The same way they did in 2020, the same way they did in 2018, the same way they did in 2016. So Democrats have the upper hand, even when years have incumbent Republicans, where they are able to win the popular vote. And potentially, in many cases, even with winning the popular vote, they lose races, they lose seats. In 2020, Democrats won the popular vote by just around 3 points. They lost 15 seats to the GOP. The GOP had a net gain of 12 nationwide. The Democrats won by 3. So the Democrats are only winning by 1.2% based off this model. You can only imagine how many seats the GOP would gain then relative to the 2020 House elections or 2018 as a better indicator of how some of these districts in a very similar area, with none of them probably going to be the exact same, but many of them going to be drawn in similar areas, similar regions, where the Democratic Party simply won't be performing as well as they used to. And what we see here is that some of these districts, let's take a look. For example, we have Nevada's 3rd congressional district, where the Democratic Party is expected to win by 0.4%. In the 2020 House election, Nevada's 2nd district, actually I believe the 3rd district, was in the lean Democratic column. It wasn't really expected to be this close race that was ultimately going to the Democrats by 3 points. But the takeaway is when you look at the opposing sides, what was in the Democrats expected to win narrowly column versus Republicans expected to win narrowly column, there's big differences. For Nevada's 3rd district, Democrats win by 3. Directly across to North Carolina's 11th, Republicans win by 12. In Nevada's 4th district, Democrats win by 5. In Ohio's 10th, Republicans win by 17. The standard for Republicans in the House elections were much higher than they were, I would say, for the Democrats. What Democrats won, this was true. They won narrowly. I can't find a single race in the Republicans expected to win narrowly column where the Republicans won by less than 6 points. I can't find a single race. In the toss-up column, I can't find a single race the Democratic Party won. And in the worst case for Democrats, in the Democrats expected to win narrowly column, they lost a race by 3 points, 4 points in Texas's 23rd congressional district. So despite Democrats making inroads in 2018 and having somewhat or moderately popular incumbents, the GOP struck in full force in the 2020 House elections. These close races that were decided by 0.1, 0.9, 0.01, less than that, decided by 0.03, 1.3, 1 point. Many of these close races ultimately put the GOP in a very strong position heading into 2022. And we see that here in the model. So for some of these states that used to be in the toss-up column are now very solidly Republican. States that used to be in the lean Democratic column are now leaning towards the Republicans. And some of the when I say states, I mean districts. Some of the districts that are now previously were in the safe or solid category for the Democratic Party, we are starting to see those revitalize and be brought back up as potential races that could be lost on behalf of the Democratic Party. And I showed you, I told you that I would show you the House forecast for the 2020 elections, and plural vote actually overestimated Democratic support, as if this model wasn't unfortunate enough that it already predicted their loss 220 to 215. But in 2020, they expected Democrats to win 232 seats to 203. The actual numbers were 222 to 213. So the difference there was that the GOP gained 10 more seats than expected by plural vote, and if they expect the GOP to win by 5, potentially speaking, if you apply the same error, the Republicans would win 230 over 205, which wouldn't be the worst case for the Democratic Party, but it would return them to a 2012 type of number where the Democratic Party isn't exactly being blown out, but they aren't in a position where winning back the majority is easily accessible. 2018 was hard fought, and 2020 was as well. The Democratic Party had to fight and fundraise for every single one of these races that they won. While many of them were expecting to do exceptionally better, and of course, this was a lackluster result, I'm also not going to deny that the Democratic Party held on to just the right amount of seats. The fact that they were able to hold on to competitive districts in New Hampshire, competitive districts in Maine, competitive districts in other states, California, that were just as competitive as some of the ones that flipped back to the GOP in 2020. The Democratic Party still, I would say, was able to hold their ground. Even though it was a poor performance, it wasn't enough so that Republicans were able to win back the House of Representatives in 2020. So for this forecast, they have the probability over time, and the Democratic Party actually started out with the advantage. Following the 2020 election, the Democrats were up around 6 points on Election Day, November 3rd, 2020, Democrats were up 6 percentage points. But following the more and more House elections, by the time we reached November 19, the Republicans took ahead and consistently held that lead until around January of 2021. And that's when Joe Biden became a popular president and became the president of the United States. But for a brief period of time, the Republican Party was expected to win the House forecast. And if you're wondering why the numbers were so beneficial for Democrats before, it's because they were banking on this 2020 forecast where they expected Democrats to win the popular vote by 7 percentage points. They won by 3. So a difference here of nearly 4 points in terms of the statewide margin versus the expected margin, which again raises concerns more for the Democratic Party than it does the GOP. While you could take it in one way and sort of argue maybe it's inaccurate and therefore the Republican Party won't gain back control of the House of Representatives, you could also apply it to the fact that they seem to be overestimating Democratic support in almost every region. Today, the Democrats stand ahead by 1.2%, which doesn't at all match what the polls are telling us that 7% number in 2020 did. So maybe I will say that, it isn't on the fault of the model itself, but maybe the polls are, not releasing numbers too effectively, which means that the plural vote estimation is a little bit lower. But I don't necessarily think this 1.2% number is going to drastically change just by a few released polling numbers. What plural vote is taking into account is something that they couldn't have taken into account in 2020. And that is a Joe Biden presidency. They could not have considered that as a main reason or a main thing to point out in terms of a positive or negative response altogether. Joe Biden wasn't president of the United States at that point, which puts the Democratic Party in a better position leading up to the election with the possibility that Donald Trump could be president and that another blue wave could happen in 2022. But since that didn't happen, the Democratic Party's chances and popular vote forecast has plummeted. Democrats started out in May of 2020 with a 50% chance of victory. Today, they stand at just a 45% chance of victory. And based off of the projected House seats distribution, you can see here that the average number of seats won by the GOP is 221. Democrats have, -3 in terms of how many seats they are behind. If this forecast is true, 220 to 205. But it is quite fascinating. And when you take a look at some of these closer races, which are expected to be decided by narrower margins, you have to look at the projected chance of victory for some of these Republican victories in some of these closer and competitive House of Representatives elections, looking across the map. Nebraska's 2nd district went to Joe Biden by 8 points. The Republican has a greater than 65% chance of victory. In Texas's 23rd district, you can see here right across, going down, it's around a 54% chance of victory. Plural vote expects the Republican Party to pretty much win a number of notable House races and then some. Win a number of notable ones and then add on by winning Democratic districts, ultimately preventing the Democratic Party from performing well in 2022. And, obviously that's not a surprise. That's just, plain politics. But there aren't many possibilities either for the Democratic Party to flip a district held by a Republican. It shows here just 5-6 districts where Republicans currently have the incumbency. But, the Democratic Party is expected to win. But this list isn't many. There are 6 districts here where the Democratic Party is expected to win that the GOP currently holds. Vice versa, meaning districts that are held by Democrats where Republicans are expected to flip, 20 Democratic-held districts expected to flip. Anywhere from a 50% chance of victory to a 75-76% chance of victory. So what's happening here is that 20 Democratic seats are expected or predicted to flip, and just 6 Republican seats are expected to flip. The Democratic Party, with a 222 to 213 majority, can only afford to lose 4 people. If they're losing 20, minus 6, 14, that's 10 behind where they want to be. And that's assuming that this plural vote margin is 100% correct. Looking at the accuracy of these projections in the past, if anything, they leaned towards the left. If anything, they expected the Democratic Party to do worse in some regions and better in others. In Pennsylvania, they expected Trump to win. In North Carolina, they expected Trump to win as well. But they expected Biden to win Florida. They expected Trump to win Arizona, Trump to win Texas, and Trump to win Georgia. Now, they were right about all the states except for Arizona, Georgia, Florida, and Pennsylvania. So they were off by around 4 states. I'm not trying to excuse them or try to defend them and say that they are in a position where they should have been given a second chance, X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. But the point being, they were wrong in 4 states. So keep that in mind as well. They don't have a perfect track record, but they can provide us some type of insight as to the state of the race for the 2022 midterm House elections. And it is quite fascinating today that even with a plural vote model, which in 2020 in the presidential election and in the House of Representatives, I personally believed leaned towards the left. If they are still predicting a GOP victory 220 to 215, that number is potentially higher. They may have had time to alter their projections, alter their models themselves, but for right now, I'm going to stick with the fact that it seems as if not only will the GOP win back control of the House of Representatives, but that they have a better chance than what plural vote is suggesting. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.